You are listening to the Necropolis podcast, which is brought to you by Jason from Goatcraft and Shelly from HateMeditations.com and Metal Legion magazine. Welcome to Necropolis. Sorry about the hiatus. There's a lot of crazy stuff going on. I moved to the DFW area, finished college, blah, 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 blah. But anyway, we are back in action today. So we do have Shelly returning as co-host. Thank you, Shelly, for coming back after the hiatus.
Hello, good to be back.
And great to have you. So Shelly is from HateMeditations.com and Metal Legion magazine. Always a great, insightful guest on this program. So today's main guest is Jason Hans from Judas Goat. Some people may be familiarized with him from his other band, Rooms of the Evening, as well as he's a big promoter up here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. He puts together a lot of the underground metal shows and even some metal adjacent shows where he has like neo-folk and industrial projects and all that place. Really cool guy. I've known him for about 10 years now, and figure it's about time you come on the program. So thank you for coming on, Mr. Jason Hans.
Thanks for having me, sir.
Yes, sir.
Sir is plural. Thank you.
So your new album is out, released on October 31st on Halloween. And I think it's actually the debut album from Judas Goat.
So we had a raw demo probably back in 2015. It's called Speed and Raw. It's on our Bandcamp also. But this is our first full length, technically. So.
Yeah, and it's a mixture of like black metal and thrash. So it's not really like breaking any like big molds. It's just solid for what it is. Like Shelly wrote a review, and it's called Incantations of the Black Mass, which is on CD and vinyl. And Shelly wrote a review on it on HateMeditations.com, and he kind of compared it to like early Bathory, like if they had never gone with the Viking metal stuff, that they could have perhaps gone into a similar direction that you went with Judas Goat.
Yeah, when we were writing the album, it was basically in different phases because we had several different drummers and a couple of other bandmates that came and went. It's basically three phases overall, but we had always had an affinity for the older guard, first wave black metal, kind of the proto beginnings of that. We liked a lot of classic old German thrash and things like that. We love Celtic Frost. We love Sodom, older Creator. Also, of course, Bathory, and we were also into older Dark Throne and things like that. And yeah, some of our members we like old school punk too. So you could probably hear little elements of all of that in what we're doing. It's not we're not reinventing the wheel. We're more like paying tribute to it, to the old guard, I guess you could say. We like to have a raw, gritty sound. It's kind of defines the way we feel when we're writing the music, and it conveys that kind of attitude. We're just raw, aggressive, stripped down metal, to say the least, I guess.
Yeah, Shelly had mentioned there's like a little hint of like a punk influence in there as well. Correct, Shelly?
Like I said in my review, it reminds me of that middle section of Bathory's Blood, Fire, Death, where there's a really sort of heavy thrash kind of section, and it does pull together. The album does pull together a lot of those bands and styles that you mentioned. Yeah, sort of early German thrash, and I know Corfon also like had an affinity with old school punk as well, that he incorporated a lot into that. And yeah, the Judas Goat did really remind me of that sort of pulling together. Yeah, like again, the early German thrash is very like proto black metal as well. Early Creator and early Sodom as well. And yeah, Corfon, I know he was a bit what's the word, liberal with the truth in terms of his influences at times. But you can tell, regardless of what he claimed at the time, you can tell that he was influenced by that on some of the thrashier numbers on Under the Sign of the Black Mark and Bloodfire Death. And yeah, to me, the Judas Goat seemed to really kind of tap into that kind of moment in the sort of mid to late 80s before black metal became what it is known today, and before Korthon got deep into the Viking stuff.
I would definitely have to agree. That is kind of that approach. Bathory being definitely among the influences, and we just like the raw. I guess there's kind of a purity to it. It's a stripped down, simple sound. There's nothing really technical about it. It's more raw emotion flowing with it, and you just you kind of let her rip. You just let it all out and see where it goes, and that's what happened basically. When we first started jamming together, we always had kind of just this raw, let's go with what we feel kind of approach, and just we established our guitar tone, and we had wanted to have kind of a thrashy, black metal-y kind of a D-beat punk drumming approach with some grind or technical blast beats incorporated, and we made it where we could be a bit organic on how we approach the drums with it, and it allowed us to approach drummers that might not be conventional black metal drummers or thrash drummers. You have guys that play metal, what you would call metal punk, which is you have a lot of people that listen to Venom, and they also listen to Discharge and bands like that. So, if you get drummers that have a diverse background, then you can utilize their talents better, and it adds a dimension to it that we feel kind of approaches that raw, simple rage, gritty kind of attack, and that's where we went with it.
Yeah, so Korthon, he said Wagner was one of his influences, which I would imagine that would kind of go into like the Viking style that he kind of innovated. But so, like Shelley, you're saying he was kind of liberal with some of his influences that he said on paper, but in execution is quite different. But you can tell, like with the Viking stuff, he really focused on the development quite a bit, with the acoustic guitars and how they develop with a specific theme and then go to distortion and more powerful. And like the midsection, like you said, is very thrashy. And so it would be like in like a alternate universe, like your review stated, it'd be kind of interesting if he never adopted that Viking metal aspect and just continued playing, black thrash, and kept developing that further and further, which we kind of have like that alternate dimension with this new Judas Goat album. So something interesting that I always try to find something odd or interesting about a band, and in this instance, I discovered that the meaning of the name Judas Goat, I thought it was just like, Judas, the guy who betrayed Jesus, and just throw a goat next to that, and that's fucking metal. But no, it's a herding goat, which can distinguish between sheep and cattle, and it's often deployed at slaughterhouses. So it's actually a herding goat. So that's really interesting. So that's obviously where the name came from, correct?
Yes, that is exactly where it came from. It's a literal term they use for when you want to lead your mutton to the processing, and the only way to do it is to have one animal lead them in, because otherwise they get skittish. So, yeah, Judas Goat is usually employed to get them in the pens where they can be handled.
Jesus, yeah, because I was the same. I just thought, yeah, it's just a fucking old school black metal name. I didn't realize it was like a term at an abattoir or something. That's quite funny.
Yeah, it allows for the darker imagery to kind of seep into it. I suppose it's metal and true. So
Well, yeah, it's
it's
also got kind of a nice metaphorical aspect to it, I guess, as well. Like,
yeah,
yeah,
kind of like a dark Pied Piper or something like that. I guess in a way, or a darker Pied Piper was dark, but at the same time,
darker,
but yeah.
Instead of leading rats, it's leading sheep and cows.
or collectively, I guess people. But if you have if you have a metaphor of leading people to their end, or kind of a dark messenger leading people into a different direction, or anything like that, it's just kind of it gives an ambience of darker than average imagery, I guess. It's definitely not, a lot of people think, oh, it's just a knockoff of Judas Priest. No, it's its own meaning. It's well before that was ever a concept. I mean, Judas goats have been around since probably Roman times or more. Whenever, I guess it got named that once Christianity was around, but it's been probably around since before that, as long as people have herded sheep and goats. So we're going back thousands of years on that. But a lot of what we write about are occult concepts and things, and sometimes it's just more simpler topics. But I would think a lot of what we draw from in what we write about, specifically, I write most of the lyrics. I draw from occult concepts and things I've read. There's a little bit of Lovecraft in there. I mean, I'm a huge Lovecraft fan as well, and we like to incorporate a little bit of this and that. It makes it more interesting, and that way we're not limited on what we can draw from. There's all kinds of angles of darkness to draw from, I suppose. But you could go into the Lovecraftian and shove Nagroth, image the gut of 1,000 young. That's a fun one to work with, and quite a bit of other things too. So, just to give you a background of what I draw from.
Yeah, there's plenty of Lovecraftian themes that are great for metal. Just that aspect of sheer power beyond comprehension, and it seems like gods to us, but for them it's like, yeah, we're just multi-dimensional creatures, and or a goat with 1,000 young or whatever. So it really challenges like the notions of perceivable reality and limitations of the human agent in that regard. And so yeah, I think it's fucking metal, and definitely a lot of great themes have been utilized in metal from Lovecraft and all that. But one thing about this album that I noticed, your vocals kind of sound quite a bit like MKM from Antaeus. Did you pick up on that at all, Shelley?
I didn't while I was reviewing it. So I think while I'm reviewing, I tend to sort of focus more on the music to kind of get the structure and the style down, and then I'll kind of pay attention to the vocals as how they add elements to it. But yeah, I don't think I spotted that, but I'll have to listen again and see where you're coming from.
Yeah, that was one of the first things I noticed. Like, God damn, it sounds, he is a great black metal vocalist. And yeah, it's very in that vein that I thought. So yeah. So if you like MKM from Antaeus and you like black thrash, Judas Goat is right up your alley. So Jason, aside from being in bands, you are also a organizer here for metal shows in the DFW area, the Dallas-Fort Worth area. And, I've played quite a few of your gigs where I drive up from San Antonio, and I either play with metal bands or I would play with like neo folk and industrial, or you know outside of the norm, like metal adjacent projects. So like what kind of germinated your mind about not sticking solely to metal, that you want to put on different kinds of shows too?
I think that goes back to where my interest in music in general started. It began with, I guess you could probably say classic rock now is what it would be called now. That's when I was a child. And it graduated into heavier music. But at the same time, when I was young, I took music appreciation classes and had a good exposure to classical music. And classical is so broad in its textures and in its approach to different themes, and so as music develops in time, you notice how things borrow from it, and you get a lot of it is metal, but a lot of it is also atmospheric music, ambient music, different orchestral influence themes. There's aspects of that in certain electronic groups and industrial, and so it's a broad, unlimited scope that you can go with on that. And so I went down so many rabbit holes of music on things that appeal to me based on what appealed to me in classical music, and also in heavier music. So there were so many different interchanges and textures shared between these things that are unconventional and definitely not, cookie cutter at all. And so when I grew up to appreciate all these things, I got into industrial, I got into dark atmospheric music, I got into metal and heavier punk and all that. So, I mean, I was all over the place. But at the same time, I always had an appreciation for those things. And when I was growing up in my 20s, because I'm old now, I'm like 50 now, but there was always a kind of underground thing where you would have crossovers, or you would have contrasts and styles that would still play together in shows. And this was in the 90s. So on that, I wanted to bring that forth and bring that back in a way to where people could see more than one side of the coin. If you want dark and heavy, it doesn't have to be just one style. There's a lot of different ways to convey an idea. And as a fan of the music, I wanted to have a way to access that, and not many people were doing it. There would be occasional ones, but at the time there wasn't many people really willing to do that. So whenever I got the chance, I did it, and I thought it was a way to bring people to share ideas and things that they may have not gotten to see before. And when it came to me starting promotion in general, when you're new and in a band and you've got to do all these, you've got to find your way to get a foot in the door. And a lot of times clubs aren't so receptive at first. You have to play their stupid battle of the bands on a weeknight when nobody's going to be there because everybody works. Or you're matched with bands that don't complement your style or any kind of philosophical agreement at all. So, you're going to be put in with bands that won't, the fans don't interchange ideas or passion. They're basically there to see one band and then they go away. So that, it's not a good formula as far as a chemistry. So I always noticed that a chemistry is important in order to have a good lineup. It doesn't have to be the same type of band. It's as long as you have this underlying philosophy or some sort of approach. It could be something from dark keyboards on one hand and then really dark DB punk on another. But as long as you shared a concept in a way, then it would work because people would get it. You just have to hit that right chord and bring it together. And when I was doing the band thing, especially with Runes, we'd have to play all these crappy shows, and it got old, and I wanted to have a way to empower ourselves to have a better chemistry with our lineups. And so we started doing our own shows, and that way we could, improve the quality of the show by having other bands that we shared, friendships with and wanted to play with. And that's how I met Jason. Was we became friends with Plutonia and Shore, and we did some dates with them, and Jason did some dates with them. And so after that, we became friends, and we networked more, and here we are.
Yeah, it's interesting that, because I think from an audience perspective, they can sometimes become a bit too preoccupied with, when they go to a gig, they expect all the bands to be roughly the same genre or whatever. But at the same time, if you can form a halfway decent thrash band or a death metal band within a local scene, you'll pretty much have a ready-made audience, but you can guarantee that your audience won't really extend much beyond that. But if you start mixing the styles, like you said, if they all have that underlying ethos of darkness or heaviness, and you pitch it right, then you can start to expand the audience. You'll get fans of sort of surrounding genres like industrial or goth or folk or whatever. I'd like to take an example. A few months ago, we interviewed a band called Dead Space Chamber Music on this podcast, who are they incorporate elements of medieval music. They sometimes sound a bit like Dead Can Dance, some English folk elements as well. But they've kind of pulled in an audience from metal alongside kind of audiences from darker folk music and goth and industrial. But they were struggling for a while to find their audience because they didn't really fit into any of those styles. But if you have promoters willing to take those risks and put on bands that are not necessarily kind of remotely related in terms of genre, but they clearly share a similar kind of ethos or spirit, then you can kind of start to grow the audience that way. And, kind of almost, not to sound patronizing, but educate the audience a bit as well, maybe open their mind to new musical experiences they wouldn't necessarily come across otherwise.
Absolutely. I mean, when I was young, we went and saw, Carcass with Godflesh way back then, or Napalm Death. All those bands we threw together. Napalm Death and Godflesh sound nothing alike. But yet we discovered them just by going to see Napalm Death or Carcass, and I fell in love with Godflesh. It was Street Cleaner era, and it was a phenomenal album. It was totally different, so it stood out in the best way. And I had already liked bands like Ministry and Skinny Puppy at the time, so to discover them through an unexpected avenue was even better. But that was an example back then in the 90s of where people were willing to throw things with a common ethos, but at the same time a very distinct difference. And you discover new things that way. But that was back when I guess Earache was much more groundbreaking, and all that. They've withered on the vine a lot since then.
Yeah, I think Godflesh were always a bit of the outlier in that Earache crowd. Earache back then were more willing to take risks, but I think, people at the time, and this is me just going off testimonials and interviews I've seen, but they either didn't quite get Godflesh or that, as you said, they fell in love with them. But I remember people didn't quite know what to do with them and put them on a lineup with, grindcore, Carcass, Napalm Death, or so on. Or I think at one point they even toured with Danzig as well, which, given what I said, just still seems like an odd matchup to me, but seemed to work.
Yeah.
It's kind of
I think they
like Shelley was saying, educating, not in a derogatory stance, but for like GoCraft, for instance, just talk about, the shows that I played. On one hand, I would play with those metal adjacent projects like Alwyn and Crawl that you would put together. On the other hand, you would also book me on black metal shows. And what I noticed with black metal shows is usually half the crowd leaves when I start playing. Like, it is what it is. Some people just are there for black metal, and having a guy blast piano at them may not be why they're there. But it's kind of interesting. Like, there's people that won't stick around for something that they're not really familiarized with. So it's, I do think people should broaden their outlooks a little bit. Regardless of my music, you can hate it if you don't like it, but at least give it a little bit of a chance. And you're trying to present that to the audience of here's something a little bit from left field that you probably never heard before or anything like it, but it's still dark, it's still powerful, whatever. And you give them the opportunity to check it out. It's up to them whether or not they take it. And just a little factoid here, Shelley may like this. The black metal scene up in the DFW area, I like it. It's very healthy. But there's one little quirky thing about it is that some of the fans will wear corpse paint to the shows. I have never seen that in any other city where you can't distinguish the fans from the bands because there's so many people wearing corpse paint. Where did that come from, Jason?
There's always been 2 or 3 you'll see that'll do that. I think those are the younger fans that are trying to embed themselves into it. It's not. Those are newer fans, probably been into it a few years versus say a 10-year embedded person. I've been listening to it for going on 30 plus years. So, I've noticed there's always been a few that'll do that. These, you have kids that are embracing it and it's new and they've been into it like a year or 6 months and they just want to absorb themselves in it totally. So that's what they do. It's not something that anybody told them to do. It's just that was their thing. And like I said, there'll be out of 100 or whatever people there, you'll have 2 or 3 that do that. So, it is what it is.
I was going to say the only place I've seen that is in London, and it is always the younger fans. It's like they're getting dolled up for their first proper gig. I'm based in Leeds in the north of the country where thrash and doom metal is a bit more popular, and that's very just jeans and t-shirt and that's it. But yeah, down south you might see metalheads getting a bit more dressed up with spikes and leather and corpse paint and stuff. But yeah, it is normally the younger fans that do that.
Yeah, it's just I'll look at it this way. I'd rather have the younger fans there because that means that they're going to keep it alive and keep it going than to try and gatekeep it to the extent that you can't be here because you're not following some sort of protocol. I think that's a big issue in metal right now is, okay, how many rules do you want to have on something that's supposed to be against rules? I understand having some conventions because that's what you're going for and you don't want to distract from what you're doing. But at the same time, you have to allow it to breathe enough to where it still is healthy. So I guess there's a fine line in a way that it organically evolves to do one thing or the other in order to keep itself alive.
Yeah,
that's the way the music scene works.
Yeah, for metal being outsider music, it's strangely very conformist. There are a lot of traditions and rules and unsaid rules and things of that nature that everyone kind of conforms to. And like David Burke, he came on this program. He was going for his PhD in metal studies. He even stated that, metal is, very conformist, but also is teaching men how to sew by sewing, patches on their vest to signal, that they conform to the quote unquote rules, or the traditions of a specific style of metal. You have your war metal guys with revenge patches, you have your death metal guys with, death metal patches and things of that nature. And they're all signaling that they conform to a specific kind of, flavor of metal or flavors. And so it's strangely very conformist, for being outsider music. But it might just be human nature to, create categories.
I was going to say it's absolutely human nature. If you look through every subsect or every subgroup of humankind, everything has its own little tribal traits. Whether it's a cultural thing or a fashion thing or whatever, it is human nature defined to have certain things that define it in general, and that's what makes it what it is. Otherwise, it would just not be noticeable. So it's human nature. Sometimes we overthink things, and sometimes we don't think enough of it. But in general, that it comes down to that. It really does.
Yeah, I think it's the difference between sort of just getting like dressed up to go out and have fun. Like I'll normally just throw on a band t-shirt and normally like try and go for the most obscure black metal one that I have. And then if it strikes up a conversation, even better. But it's when it becomes like policed to the point where, you have certain expectations placed on you or whatever. That's when it starts to become a bit more like problematic, because yeah, you're right. It really should just be non-conformist and everyone can do what they want. But I know that everyone enjoys flying their flag, whether it's their particular denim jacket with all the patches on. They just enjoy, displaying the kind of metal that they subscribe to. And there's nothing wrong with that, just as there's nothing wrong with kids donning corpse paint for the night. But it's when it becomes like exclusive or exclusionary on the basis of what you're wearing or how you're dressed or whatever. That's when it starts to become a problem, I guess.
Yeah, it's a matter of how much of human nature do you want to fall into, or do you want to be above that? It's actually kind of a interesting sociological approach, if you really think about it. But I mean, every sect of music or cultural thing all has that. Punk rock has it too. You look at the biker culture, that has it as well. And they're very rule oriented in that. So I mean, it's there's all kinds of examples to look at as far as that. But on a lighter note, I mean, the bottom line is everybody is there for the same reason. They're passionate about the music, and that music speaks for them, or it speaks to them in a way to where they can let their emotions out, their energy. It's actually healthy to go to a metal show and just let it all hang out. There's been studies done on it. It actually, it's like a cheap psychotherapist in a way. You go to a metal show and you feel better afterwards because you just let all your negativity out, and then you're exhausted and you feel better for it, and then you can't wait till the next time. So it's a good thing.
How would you compare like the Dallas Fort Worth scene to like the San Antonio or Houston scenes? Like the way I think Dallas is a little bit more civilized. Granted, a lot of the shows happen in Deep Ellum and crime is really rising there, but I always kind of viewed like Dallas it's kind of like the civilized Texas metal scene, but San Antonio is the feral Wild West where there's a lot of fights that break out, and Houston's kind of like a mixture of the two, and Austin's always been Austin. It's a little bit different and weird. But how would you compare like the Dallas Fort Worth metal scene to like other scenes in Texas?
It depends on which subsect of metal or extreme music you're talking about. Like when it comes to the whole TXDM club, brutal death metal, and those tend to be very consistent across the board. When it comes to black metal or kind of underground hybridized stuff like Black Death, thrash, and the more kind of fuzzy line kind of thing, those, I guess occult themed metal would probably be a good way to title it. Those tend to be a bit more aggressive in some sounds. I think your description is pretty accurate. Houston seems to be a mix of Dallas and San Antonio. Austin's probably the mellowest of all.
Austin. I have a funny story about Austin. They're well, the 6th Street and Red River area, there's like hundreds of venues. All kinds of people are out there partying, going bar to bar. So the shows there, like a metal show, maybe comprised of half the people not really into metal. They're just kind of bar hopping and checking, whatever's going on. But I had put on I was playing with Goatcraft, and I put on All This Fake Blood. And I think it was at the old Headhunters, which was on that show, Bar Rescue. And Metal and Lace is what it was called before they had to finally shut down. But I had the Fake Blood on, and I remember walking through the crowd, and you can tell who the Austin guys were. It was like they were really upset at me they thought it was real blood, that I wasn't being very clean, that I could infect people with bacteria and whatnot with the fake blood. And you can tell they're scoffing at me, and it's just really strange. And other cities, I never had that happen. I had perhaps like a venue owner would get upset at me for having fake blood in the bathroom or something like that, get on the ground or whatever. But Austin is kind of like a little pretentious, I would say, because there's like non-metal people there, and that was back when there was a great influx of hipsters, and hipsters were really invading the metal scene up there. And but yeah, I view Dallas as kind of civilized. Like I said, I'm sure fights happen here and there, but like I had Hell Preacher Johnny on one show here, and we were talking about Texas metal, and he saw 7 different fights at the Corova. 7 different fights the same night. I was like, whoa, man. I've seen like maybe 2 or 3, but not fucking 7.
Yeah, in Dallas, you might have 1 or 2 occasionally, and usually it's fights between couples, or somebody flirting with somebody else's a significant other, kind of petty stuff that you probably find in just about any club scene. But it's just I think Dallas people, when it comes to that, there's a few that you'll see. I see them more like the brutal death metal shows, but people are there for the music for the most part. And the ones that aren't are the ones that'll come in and out, and they'll be on the patio smoking and drinking on the patio or whatever half the night. So you can tell which ones are into, because they're the ones that aren't there inside the whole time watching the bands, but the ones that are, they're into it, and they're there for the music. So I mean, being that I run door at a lot of my shows, I kind of see the whole cross section of what happens. So it's people watching, But
yeah, in the UK, sorry, go on.
Go ahead.
Oh no, I was just going to say in the UK, it's kind of ironic. Like the more mainstream the music is at a particular venue or whatever, the more likely the trouble's going to break out because people aren't necessarily there for the music. They might just be like, as you said, bar hopping or whatever. And yeah, not really fussed about seeing music. But if you're going to an actual metal gig, people are there normally for one thing. And it's quite, I wouldn't say it's rare for a fight to break out, but it's definitely rarer than it would be at a sort of generic club or bar or show with just more generic rock or pop music where people aren't really fussed about seeing the bands or whatever.
Yeah, I would say a couple of weeks ago we had Morbosidad play Dallas, and my band Judas got open for them, and we had a Houston band, Necropolis, and we had a couple of our local bands as the first two bands. And we hadn't had a lineup like that in a while because it's just, touring's been expensive for bands, especially underground bands that aren't necessarily backed by a label and all that. So that, they're funding their own expenses to get from city to city. So it's a big deal if they're making a run and going to play. So it's not somebody you would see all the time. In fact, Morbosidad had never played Dallas before. And this is their final tour. So it's the first and last. But we had a packed house come out for it. And they stayed for every band. And you could just feel that everybody was so excited to see Morbosidad and just the whole atmosphere of the night. It was like I would say the real fans came out. The people that were in it for the music showed up. And the people that would normally just be there for one band or that go for 5 minutes for each band and the rest of the time be at the front bar or the patio, most of those people weren't there. This was a much more dedicated audience than average. And it was really heartening to see. I mean, just to have it that consistent. It was something that hadn't been for a few years because COVID broke a lot of that up. And so for it to return like that, it was kind of a return to form of dedication in a way to the music. And it was encouraging, I would say.
Yeah, Morbosidad's been playing a lot. I saw them in last year, and I believe it was not the Limelight. It was the venue right next to the Limelight, and it was pretty cool. That was Hod's first show, since the pandemic too. So I think the majority of people were there to support their local heroes in Hod. But yeah, Morbosidad, they put on a good show. It sucks that this is their farewell, but that band's been around a long time. Like I believe in like 1995, like their original drummer died in an explosion in the rehearsal room.
Oh my God! Wow.
And another drummer there died too. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, 2 dead drummers.
Wow.
Some trivia.
I had no idea that had happened. That's, man, for them to stay together and keep going after all that. That's.
It's none of my business, but explosions don't usually happen in rehearsal rooms. So I wonder how that actually transpired. But it's none of my business. Who knows what that was? But
yeah, that's the. Whew. That's tragic though.
Yeah, it's very tragic. But yeah, they've been gigging around quite a bit now, and I know they played Steelfest in Finland while I was in Finland earlier this year. But I unfortunately didn't get to see them because I was hanging out with Marco Lepo. So hopefully he comes on the program next year. But that's in the works. But
nice.
Yeah, I know they had a really good showing there. And so yeah, it's really cool. I know the other guys in that band have side projects like Church Aside and things like that. So yeah, very active people in the Texas scene. So at least we'll still have them gigging around. So kind of you're talking a little bit about your history, getting into metal. up here in the DFW. So like Shelly, he may know of a few bands from here. Like there's Absu, Rigor Mortis.
Yeah, one of my favorites, definitely Absu. Absolutely.
Yeah, there's Rigor Mortis, Divine Eve. Those are like the main three, in my opinion. Which other bands do you like up here?
Really like Cleric. They're good friends of mine, and they got that Swedish death metal sound. They do it really well. They just got a really solid approach to it, and their lyrical content is pretty dark. It's really good. Occult approach to lyrics. All these people I know personally. I mean, I've known them for forever. All those bands you mentioned, I've booked. Rigor Mortis had Mike passed away about 12 years ago, and then of course they lost their singer as well, Bruce. But I mean, they were always contemporaries, and well, hell, they were like well ahead of anything I did. I mean, I was a kid going to see them, but I always respected them and thought highly of them. They're very talented. Divine Eve is a fantastic band. I've worked with two different members of them at my regular day job over the years. I don't work with them now, but worked for several years with them. They're good friends. Another band I really like, it's from here, is My Stops Big Board, who used to be an Absu way back in the early days. And they're a fantastic band. Bands like Nocturnal Wolf. There's a lot to name, but not to leave anybody out. But there's a lot of talent around here.
Yeah, people don't realize. People don't realize how big this area is. The Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex. There's millions and millions of people here, so there's bound to be some good bands. But yeah, it's great. Like you're like I view you as like one of the main like underground promoters here. Granted, I played quite a few of your shows and always had a great time. And always, like I said, it's very civilized here compared to other parts of Texas. Like, and I always feel very welcome. You're a very welcoming promoter, and you definitely handle everything with a lot of care. So I view you as, probably the most solid promoter up here that I know. So it's great to ask you questions,
Thank you,
probe, and all that. And so other than the DFW bands, are there like any like really influential bands that kind of inspire? You talked a little bit about German thrash and all that, and being an inspiration for Judas Goat, but your other bands, prior bands like Runes of the Evening, had quite a different sound. It was like more melodic. Like, what was like the influence with that compared to like Judas Goat?
Absolutely, Dissection was an influence on that band a lot. That whole mellow death approach. Basically, the guitarists were into the old At the Gate, Slaughter the Soul era, whereas I was more into the Red in the Skies. I'm old school, and I preferred the old school Swedish death metal, Dismember and all that, Grave. But they were into Dissection a lot, and At the Gates. Those they got a lot of their influence from that. And you can probably say Iron Maiden as well, as far as like the solo aspects or the melodic playing, and things of that nature. That kind of generation. that band, I was the oldest guy in the band, and the rest of the guys were all millennials. So that was kind of their exposure to that style, because that's when they were young. They got exposed to that when they were growing up.
Yes.
Whereas I was a bit of the older school generation, the early '90s material and late '80s, whereas they were more in the mid to late '90s kind of stuff.
Yeah, it's kind of,
that's what they grew up with.
like distinctly different types of metal, but your vocals, work great with, both kinds. So it's kind of, great in that aspect that, your approach to the vocals, is very organic and kind of amorphous in a way that it's able to be molded into different projects with different, goals and sounds, but you're able to, do that very proficiently. So it's very cool. So we are about to wrap up. Any last things you want to talk about today?
I just want to say thank you to you both for having me on, and appreciate the review on the album and the support. And I will definitely be listening to more of these shows. I enjoy it, and you guys do a good job.
Thank you very much. And definitely a great guest, a great figure here in the Dallas Fort Worth area. If you want to check out one of his shows sometimes, is there a specific place online where people can find that?
Generally, I'll post online for events with event stuff. I don't have anything scheduled immediately right now. Probably in the later spring, I will. I'm working on a few things, but they haven't been confirmed, so I can't really promote them as of yet. But,
usually have themes to your shows, like solstice, things of that nature, where you try to check out what's happening with the lunar calendar or things of that.
That's right. I do have I guess an appreciation for certain occult aspects, and so I tend to incorporate them in what I do. As you said, like solstices and things of that nature. But I guess if I want to say anything, we've got the Judas Goat album out. We have it on Bandcamp right now, CDs, and we're taking pre-orders for vinyl. They generally take a while to ship, so we do pre-orders in order to make it where it's price effective for everybody involved. And we will have more merch coming out. I guess as far as Judas go, we do have a Fight Cancer benefit on January 7th at the Halton Theater in Halton City. It's near Fort Worth, basically. It's us and a conglomeration of death metal and thrash bands, basically. And I think there's a black and death band called Lucifer Invictus that is our drummer's other band that is on that as well. It's basically a benefit for fighting cancer. We've had some people with cancer lately, friends of ours, and it kind of hit us personally on several levels. So when we were asked to do it, we went ahead and agreed to do it for that reason. So I guess as far as anything coming up, that's the only thing I can think of right now.
Yeah, it's a great cause, raising money for, cancer and all that, treatment. So I want to thank you very much for coming on the program today. Incantations of Black Mass was just released this past Halloween. Like you said, it's available on CD and they are taking pre-orders for vinyl. Shelley, I want to thank you for coming back and being co-host.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's been a great chat. And yeah, check out the Judas Goat. It's really, really solid, old school black metal. Should be right up your street. So yeah, thank you very much for chatting.
Yes, sir. And thank you very much for coming on the program today, Jason.
Thank you, gentlemen. Much appreciated.
Yes, sir. Have a great rest of your day.
All right. You too. Thanks, guys.